Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fialka. Today is Feb 13, 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant for hosting us on his amazing podcast channel called I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. Thank you, Rob. He's probably babysitting his daughter somewhere in Canada. And it's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Mike Rollo. Is that the correct way to pronounce it, Mike?
Yeah, some people say Rollo. I say Rollo. Doesn't matter.
Rollo, okay.
Rollo,
And
like the candy bar.
like the candy bar. That's sweet. And where are you calling in from?
Regina, Saskatchewan.
How cool. Mike, the first question is what is the best thing for a human being?
Love.
I get
Uh,
that answer all the time. Hey, how appropriate. Tomorrow's Valentine's Day.
well, I'll be going out with my partner tomorrow to celebrate in some way.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a great word and it's a noun and a verb. It covers the waterfront. What is your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
I like the radio a lot.
Wow.
Um, yeah. I think the reason for that is that, when I'm doing prep work for school or any type of creative work, I don't want too much distraction, but I also like a voice, in the background somewhere. Um, I also, I listen to a lot of CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. And so, in the mornings when I do a lot of my work, this is where I get a lot of my news and arts and culture content. And it's nicely programmed, for better or for worse. But, I get a lot of information where, they might be covering someone I know and admire, but then sometimes I'll be introduced to someone, whether it's a writer or an artist that I don't know, and it's kind of a nice pleasure then to take a deep dive somewhere else. Um, but it's the comfort of the voice that
Yeah.
I like, and
Yeah, I like your use of words because that's exactly why I'm so into the radio as well. The comfort of the voice, you know, and sometimes it's not always comfortable, but it's just hearing the radio. It's amazing for Sabine Gruffat, who I was just talking about, experimental filmmaker I interviewed a couple days ago, exact same answer. She said radio. And I was like, wow, these film people are saying, why do you think humans collect or gather information?
well, I don't know if it really addresses your question. For me, it's like an understanding of a personal archive. I gather information for reasons to better understand my place in the world, to then share that knowledge with others in ways that you know have common values, or want to kind of create interesting ideas around things that I'm interested in and they're interested in. So I don't know. It's like an internal vault, I guess, in some ways, and every once in a while, I want to release that information to those that I find common ground with, and a lot of that is like to my students, right? Just so once again, I'm collecting information from them, knowledge from them that I might not know, and then I want to maybe carry that over to the next year, right? So I'm both learning from my students, but I'm also sharing my experience and my knowledge to my students as well. So it's kind of a nice bi-directional communication and sharing of ideas.
Dude, you are good with words. I like what you just said, and I think that commonality sensibility is so important. And do you think this need or want for humans to collect information is more innate or more invented?
I think it's innate. And the reasons for that, I'm not quite sure yet, Jerry. But I think of like we are. we're curiosity seekers. And I mean, for I can only speak for myself. It's hard to speak for others, but I'm generally curious about the world,
Yeah.
and I when something's pointed out to me, even if it's just like I'm getting kind of a superficial covering of what that topic might be, I like to do that deep dive into finding out a little bit more, whether it seeks my interest or not. But I just like to be a little bit more well-rounded. So then, if at any point that in my creative making, some sort of past information comes to the foreground, then I can apply it somehow, I guess.
Yeah. And you get it, Mike. This is about your hunch, your guess. I'm not asking these questions like there's a right or wrong answer. And of course, you put in the context you want.
Mm.
So I appreciate that, that you're listening. And the next question is, do thoughts create emotions?
These are great questions. uh, yeah, I think so. I think they have to. I mean, you're thinking about placing something on paper, or paint to canvas, or light to celluloid, and from that you create emotion, right? So there is thinking involved in terms of like how you communicate to others and how that other will then receive that information. They might be angry with you. They might console you if you're feeling sad. They might laugh with you. So yeah, thoughts do create emotion.
Can
But I could be
humans?
completely wrong.
No, that is, yeah. Well, that's why you're on Rob's show. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's a fun title for his podcast because he truly is. He's truly uh, matching what you said, curiosity. He's just curious about the world, so he thought he'd name his podcast "I'm Probably Wrong About Everything." And again, it's like all I'm after is hunch, guess, impulse. And Lily Tomlin said it so well. Reality is just a collective hunch, you know.
It's a good way
But
of putting it.
yeah, can humans think without language?
Well, I think something's probably jiggling upstairs somewhat. Is it functional or not? I'm not sure. I
Yeah,
think language provides structure of communication, but I think in like those who are nonverbal, or probably did not have like a set of language, were still thinking.
yeah,
Something was going up there. So yeah, I'm not an anthropologist, like,
yeah.
but yeah, I think so.
No, that's good. And again, some of these are at the beginning are sort of like, oh, that's a neuroscientist question. Again, it's
Yeah.
just your guess because I think in the long run, they're guessing in a way too. And they're trying to say, well, I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to study the patterns and get you a big comprehensive awareness of the subject. But how would you fill in the blank, Mike? I don't know what I think
Do.
till you do. Very good. Yeah. McLuhan, a great Canadian, says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion said, I don't know what I think until I write it. But, Walter Benjamin loves to quote this guy, George Duhamel, who said, I can no longer think what I want to think. My thoughts have been replaced by moving images. So, being a filmmaker, I thought that might resonate a little.
Yeah, and I think I kept it pretty general because do means many things.
Yeah,
Didion was a writer, so of course.
yeah, yeah,
For me, it could be applied to many things, right?
yeah,
I'm a swimmer, and so when I think about that sort of stuff, it's like, well, if I was to attempt perhaps doing so many laps, I just need to do it. Um, I just need to like have that rigor to move forward. So
yeah,
same with filmmaking. It's a lot of work and you just need to do it.
yeah.
And it might be painful. You might trip over yourself, right? But at least you're figuring it out along the way.
Yeah. No, do is a great word. I love it. And Chomsky said, a language is not just words, it's culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do, Mike, when language breaks down? When language doesn't work, what do you do?
Well, I haven't ever been put in that position, but what would I do?
Yeah.
If language breaks down,
Well, let's say you're
like,
trying to talk to one of your students and you're not getting through to them.
mhm.
And you know that spoken word language, printed word isn't getting to them.
Yeah, okay.
What's another approach? Whether it's a student or just, any sort of encounter with another human.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, okay. So I putting in that context with a student, or even my daughter, who's 7 years old and learning along the way, is I usually show. So there's like a mentorship, right? So it's
Yeah,
like mimicking of sorts, right? So she's now getting into animation and wanting to understand how that's all applied, right? And so I can tell her, and I have at first. It's like, well, the filmmaker does this, this, and that, right?
right.
And she understands that. She understands the language, right? But I think the kind of the A to the B to the C does not quite work, right? Doesn't know how to tie it all together. So she attempts it, doesn't quite work. It's like, okay, let daddy show you. So
Yeah,
then taking the camera, moving the figure, taking a picture, moving again, taking the picture. It's like, you see what daddy's doing. You see the
yeah,
motions. Okay, now you do it. Follow me. So
yeah.
then she does it, and then we review it. It's like, then the light bulb goes up, right? It just all of a sudden, boop. Yeah.
It's good. Your observations of humans in general, are they more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
I think feeling.
Yeah.
um,
Are
you
you
know,
laughing? You said, "I think feeling."
yeah.
Yeah.
I think that feeling.
95% of people say, "I think feeling." They just
No, as soon as you say it, it just sounds really awkward.
but see, that's
Ironic.
because you're a good listener. You're even listening to yourself. Most people talk on autopilot. You started cracking yourself up. That's a high art form.
I don't know if that's true or not, but thanks, Jerry. Yeah, no, um, yeah, I think we're very emotional beings, right? So just dealing with, uh, you know, again, going back to like just my experiences, that I'll probably will feel something before I think about it. Like if something attacks me, I'll be like, oh, before I reason with it, right?
Yeah,
So there's that kind of gut reaction that takes in.
yeah,
I'm just only, I'm sure someone else will have a different approach to this, but that's, this week there was something trying that I was like, overcoming, and I couldn't reason with it. So basically, what I had to do was go out to a hockey rink and shoot pucks because I was
nice.
just so I was just so angry, and
That's
so and after I was shooting the pucks, it allowed me. That was a way of just to meditate and then think about how I could approach this problem and find the solution. But the first reaction is like, I need to get skates, I need my stick, I need pucks, and I just had to bang it against the wall. And then, 20 minutes later, I calmed down and I was like, okay, now I know what to do.
yeah. My brother's been playing hockey for like 50 years, and he's gonna love to hear that one. That's beautiful. Is these are two questions from Alan Turing in 1950. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Oh, wow. This is becoming very existential here. Thinking a function of the soul. Well, do we have a soul? Does the soul make us think? That's a tricky one. I'm not sure because I don't know whether or not humans have a soul or not.
Yeah.
And if does that make it so that we think?
Well, we can leave it there, Mike, because a lot of stuff
Yeah,
a
that's
lot
a
of
trick,
stuff comes back around, and also
right?
you win because this series is all about inventing new questions. So you answered a question with a question. That's like Irish people go, I hear you Irishmen answer questions with questions. And the Irishman goes, we do, eh?
We do.
The second Turing question is, can machines think?
Machines can be programmed to think,
Yeah.
but they're programmed.
Yeah. Do you more
Yeah.
Yeah, do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Ooh, that's a great one. For me, meaning equals happiness. So if
Yeah.
I find like a meaning in something, whether it's like practice, meaning being, close to family that gives me love and happiness. Yeah, it's meaning gives me happiness.
Yeah. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we actually creating it?
I would have to think that we're creating it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to give you a reason, I would have no idea. But I think our own functions make us allow us to they allow us to dream, they allow us to think. So I would think that we're creating those
Yeah.
pathways. Yeah, yeah.
It's good. Again,
No,
Mike,
these are great. It's like I'm
well, yeah,
on the
you really
spot.
get it. A lot of people, they just answer the question, and then I move on to the next question. But you
Yeah.
go, well, I answered that question. Now I got to give you a reason. Like
Well, it's just like I
you're
just want
really
to.
sussing this out. I mean, I think that's why we gravitated towards each other at the film farm because I remember asking questions to one person. She goes, "Stop asking me questions."
Oh,
And
no.
at least you would bear with me a little.
Oh, I had a good. No, that was a great time. That was awesome.
Oh, that was super
Yeah,
special, man.
yeah,
That was
yeah.
we were lucky, that we weren't in the
Oh,
COVID time.
yeah.
They had to shut it down. I mean, that
Yeah,
and what
we were the last go, eh? Before, well,
I
I'm
don't know.
hoping Phil will open up again, but
Yeah, I don't know if we were the last go. I just know that it was this amazing gathering of people that's just so diverse and so
mhm.
fun. So what's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Oh boy. Oh, I think I'd have to say light, only because my speed of thought is slow.
So the poet Audre Lorde said you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer said you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest or do you gravitate towards? Now, again, it's like I open the question up with these cute quotes. It doesn't mean you have to apply the quote. You can if you want. It's mainly like what new tool do you gravitate towards or suggest at this point? And new is a tricky question because some people go,
Like new tool
yeah, and a new is too
or
a tricky word too because someone answered intuition. Well, intuition isn't necessarily a new tool, but it's really what tool do you suggest? What tool is inspiring you at this point? And if you want to apply it to dismantling the master's house, fine. If you want to apply it to like, oh, it's technology, a new app or whatever, that's fine too.
right. Okay. I'm gonna be super literal here, but I'm gonna say my skill saw.
Nice.
Because I just got a skill saw and I'm like working with like wood, and it's a completely new thing for me. And so
What do
yeah,
you do? What do you make with your skill saw?
Well, right now I am just like doing borders for like my basement. So like I'm just like
Oh,
very like it like
basic.
basic things right now. I still have all my fingers. So
Now the follow-up I just added a couple weeks ago because someone said toy. What new toy do you suggest?
yes. Toy. Pleasure toy. Well, it's not really a toy, but I did. It's not new, but it's new. Okay, so as we were talking before, I used to play hockey. I still do. I still skate. But I did purchase brand new skates for me, so that's a toy for me.
Nice.
It gives me pleasure. It gives me exercise. It gives me time to think. So if we were to think about something that's
Yeah.
fun and
Yeah.
active,
Yep.
that's for me. That's my new pair of skates, ice
You
skates.
get it. Mike, what do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
My my daughter's future. A lot of that right now. There's just a lot of turmoil happening north of the border. I think it's also trickling down to the U.S. as well. Like all the convoy stuff that's happening in
Yeah.
Ottawa. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's like that's been weighing on me the last couple of weeks a lot.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
So another McLuhanite, I mean, another Canadian I adore, McLuhan, learned from the poet Ezra Pound that artists, filmmakers, painters, they're the antenna of the race. They're like broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we can learn how to cope with what we don't like about them. So, there's hidden psychic effects to trucks. They've introduced trucks to the world and everybody embraced them. And now all of a sudden people are like, wow, how do trucks really shape our behavior? And some people go, we'll show you. and
Well,
so, so, so we turn to the artists to uncover these hidden psychic effects, but we still ignore them. So the basic question I asked you, Mike, is what McLuhan was probing was why do we ignore the hidden psychic of effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
oh geez, that's a good one. Well, I think like we can sense potential dangers.
Yeah,
You know, um, I think with any tool or technology, it could be used for goodwill or for harm. So always approach with caution.
yeah,
To go back to the convoy thing, we there was a big rally here in Regina, and the presence of these trucks really caused a physical sensation, right? Just like it's this, you know, uh, power dynamic shift. Like they're taking over the space. But in the same time, both my partner and I are walking. We hear these horns. You can hear them from the distance, and we're just like, "Well, that is such an interesting sonic presence." When you're up close and you're hearing these honking horns, they can be very forceful, but in from distance they have this like very sonic quality, like a electroacoustic sound that was actually really intriguing to us. um, that we kind of had a smile on our face for a weird kind of reaction to it, because we really kind of appreciate it in a different way, a different light. um, so it was something that kind of resonated for me throughout the whole day. It's just this like floating sound wall
yeah,
that I was like thinking about how could I apply that maybe in a project down the road, because it was really something.
yeah,
So once again, it's just like the vehicle itself was like had this very destructive presence, but then the sound of it created an enlightening experience for me in terms of how I could use that sound to create something positive from it in the creative making down the road. So
Beautiful,
yeah,
because you think of the first person who ever invented a horn. Like, hey, I like how geese honk. I'll make it sound like that because there's all different sounds to horns. And these low riders in LA have these, and
yeah,
it's like
yeah.
the same way. You're like, wow, it's not the normal kind of, I'm warning you to get out of my way horn.
Yeah, and there's like a really great sustain, and there's like almost like harmonics being developed from like kind of the high pitch to the low end, and I was like, wow, this is like a sonic composition here that is really something. Like hard to like really handle when you're up close, but when you took a step back, there was like a really great like floating, like just like a nice like sensual floating from like a far distance that it was really something to enjoy. But
Yep.
up close, no,
And it's reminds me of a foghorn, but a car horn saved my life the other day. I sort of made a flub in traffic because I like ride a bike 3 times a day, and I'm like a wild bike rider. I shoot
okay.
inside and out of traffic, but I try to be really cautious because it's like car up to a bike, you lose, sorry. And this guy just laid on his horn and it saved me. I
Oh
mean,
wow.
and usually I'm like, oh, it's like a startling, like, yeah, I know you can honk your horn, and it's like noise pollution to me. But in this case, it was like, thank God I was lucky. I mean, really. So do you think artists have a moral obligation?
They should have a responsibility. Yeah. I think it's like the individual's response in terms of how that would work for them. But for my work, I really tend to think ethically in terms of how I shoot, how I interact with other people, um, what my message might be and how it would affect other people. So there's moral and ethical considerations I always take in terms of being environmentally sustainable, especially with analog. Um, Understanding my communication and my conversation with others that I work with or that I tend to frame in my work. So yeah, I always think of like, um, uh, geez, I don't know who, mentioned to me originally, but I always thought of this as like kind of a good consideration is that, as photographers and filmmakers, like who's most at stake? And it's really the person in the frame. It's not the filmmaker. It's the person
Yeah.
represented within the frame. So,
Yeah.
just always kind of considering that. And
It's good.
yeah,
Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
well, old ideas are in the past and they've been explored. New ideas, I'm not afraid of them. I'm intrigued by them. Um, However, those new ideas, if they're presented to provide malice or destruction, uh, that provides no benefit for humankind to be good to each other, then yes, that's when I become afraid of
Yeah.
where that idea might go.
Yeah, Mike, I appreciate it because I'm always trying to rethink the verbs and all the words in my questions, you know.
Mm.
And so I appreciate that. Um, can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Oh, boy. You have to give me a second here, Jerry.
No, there's no hurry, man. Silence is okay in this
Like I
form.
do have early memories, but like the earliest memory.
Well, if you can't conjure up your earliest, just one early memory.
Um, hmm. Yeah. Oh, you know what? Plane ride with my father. That's a weird one. Are we all still there? Uh oh. think we lost Jerry. Hello? Hello, world. How's it going? Probably just wait for Jerry to enter back into the convo. Mm-hmm. Let's see if I got something from Jerry here. Rob, if you're on the other end, is Jerry away? I'm going to send a message to Jerry. So we'll see what happens, folks. Live events. This is what happens. Well, I don't know what to do at this point, but I'll give you a little tour of my room. So this painting here is a painting by Roger Ing. He had a really interesting, quirky cafe in Regina, Saskatchewan. Wonderful artist. And then it's like right the other way, not the other way, because it's so that is a small little picture here of Maurice Richard, and that here is a picture of my father. He passed away about a decade ago. Yeah, it's not too much to show. I'm working on a film right now. And it's all kind of right now ready to go to a transfer house to get it digitized. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'm going to actually call Jerry to see if everything is okay on his end. So bear with me. So landline. We'll see where Jerry's at here. We'll see what's going on. So exciting. I'm not getting a response. I am going to call the number on there as well. Oh, there. Might be Jerry. There we go.
Yay!
Hey.
Oh, we're still live. All right. So I don't know what it is. I got so spoiled because I've been doing this for 2 years and we never like at the beginning there were some tech problems and then there's hardly ever tech problems and I just thought it's probably cuz the Super Bowl is going to happen like I don't know 5 miles from my house and the internet's probably freaking out. I don't know.
I
It's
just
hard to
like
say.
I just did a small tour of my like room here. I was calling you to see like if you're okay. Um, yeah. Are you okay still? You're frozen.
Yeah, I can hear you now, but it was sort of in and out. So
Oh, okay.
let's
Wow,
hope
we're
for the best.
cross our fingers.
We've still been rolling. That's the good thing about StreamYard. They kept us going. So,
I was gonna call
um,
Rob and see like
so Mike,
how
you
it.
were telling me, yeah, it's a little sporadic. We'll try our best.
No worries. It's all good.
Okay, so you were telling one early memory in your life.
Yeah, no, I think like the earliest thing I can remember is when well, I give it to my daughter, but it's like airplane rides where you put the child on your feet and you just like, and for some reason that pops into my head. Like I can remember really well my father on his back against like a shag carpet and just staring at his face. I'm not sure how old I was, but I think that's the earliest memory I can like bring up.
It's beautiful. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Oh, well, I think it can be both. Um,
Yeah.
it can be yeah, it can be a blessing when you're reaching back to a past and, thinking about a good time with someone or something you've done, something that you accomplished, something you were proud of, and that's great. But yeah, it could also be a curse in terms of really fixating on something that like you were struggling with, and it could be reoccurring. I'm thinking about um, members who are well, friends or members in the family who have suffered through addictions, stuff like that, where um, they're overcoming like their past trauma,
Yeah.
and and it's hard to erase that. It's
Yep.
hard for you to kind of move on from whatever happened to you in that past. So yeah, I think it's both.
Yeah. Mike, tell me an early role model, someone who had an impact on you within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family, just briefly, and what specifically was that impact?
In my family, I would have to say both my mother and my father. They were very supportive. So, father, in terms of just supporting me with all my sports activities. He was a swimmer and a hockey player, and that's what I did, and I loved it. Came to everything I did. My mother, in terms of education, she was a teacher. Really give me a sense of work ethic. So, and then they were both loving. They're really great mentors. So I've been blessed with like really good parents.
That is
Oh
beautiful. You can tell you're sort of carrying it on because of your conscious concern for your daughter. It's like you're carrying that on.
yeah, I think I have to say I was raised with like care and love, with support. You know, my dad, my dad was a corrections officer, and to have his son pursue film production, I was always wondering what he was thinking. It was like, geez, my son's going into the arts. But there was never a time where he said, you should not do this. You're not
Yeah.
going to have a job. I'm going to be worried about you. He was always, there to encourage me. Um, and every once in a while, he would even give me tips when I was like doing my early work, right? So there was always a connection there, and that was, fantastic. So, my father's passed on a while now, but so I miss that connection quite a bit.
Yeah.
Outside, a couple of wonderful mentors, especially in high school and university. I have to say, my high school history teacher, Jean Dufresne, um, was one that introduced me to a lot of European cinema. He always found a way to connect it somehow to the topics that we were discussing in class in history. Well, it was the first exposure that I had as a grade 9, grade 10 student, looking at Truffaut and Godard. And I was always kind of into films, but this is kind of uh, a way that I got my foot in the door and really kind of thought about storytelling in different ways. And then when I was in school at university, two main instructors, faculty members that were really, quite impressive in forming my knowledge of film and giving me an expanded idea in terms of what film could be or photography could be. So that would be Don Hall and Richard Kerr.
Yeah. Richard Kerr, I was lucky enough to ask him all these questions about 2 weeks ago.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, so you can go back and compare and contrast.
Oh,
He is a trip. I love him. That guy is amazing. And I think he was a mentor to a lot of people.
he was. In my year at university, a few of us, really did some successful work under the guidance of Richard.
Yeah.
I can remember well, this is, a really great memory of Richard. It's like, I come into the university, wet around the ear, and I'm thinking, I'm going to be the next Spielberg, right? Like, like you have this like bro attitude. I come from a small city in Regina, so I'm not exposed to a lot of like arts and culture. And so whatever I get, I ingest it. Like I feed off of it, right?
Yeah.
So I'm walking down the hallway of the film department, and there's like the door of a classroom is kind of like just slightly open. It's all dark, but there's like this heavy flicker, and I poke my head in, right? And I never had Richard yet as a teacher, but I poke my head in and I see this like really intense film, and he just says, "Do you want to sit in?" And I'm like, "Can I?" And I go in. It's like a senior level class. I was maybe in my second year of university, and I just sat with like these students that I really didn't know very well, and started watching all these wonderful films. And he was showing works from Brackage and Snow, and this is my first introduction to experimental filmmaking. Right? It's like watching a Brackage film for the first time and seeing like these scratches and colors, and I'm like, wow, you can paint on film. I didn't know you could do that. That's crazy, right? I want to do that, right?
Yeah.
So I was never interested, like um, beyond that point, to actually be on on a traditional set. I was like, I wanted to think of beyond the box of what you could do with these materials. It's like this was a new opening for me, right?
Yeah.
So I thank Richard for that. It was just that, here, come sit down in my class, no problem. Watch these films. And then, guiding me along the way in making them. So, yeah.
Well, that's pretty amazing because let's just jump right into film then. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Years later, Faulkner said, "Sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism." Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Oh, I totally agree. We should just totally live life. Uh, but I think everyone has their own individual experience of a moment. And that really intrigues me. Both you and I, Jerry, we can sit down in the grass and appreciate the wind against the tree. But your observation of that moment might be very different than my moment. And we could talk about that, right? We could just verbally exchange our experiences. But then, if I hand you a camera and you hand me a camera and we both take a picture of that moment, right? I might be gravitating to something within that landscape that you're not gravitating to, and vice versa, right? And that's that expression of your time in that space. And you're
Yeah.
working with all the elements to produce an idea or a reflection of that experience or an emotion of that experience. So, it changes through the mediation of those technologies or those tools that you're using. And so, I find that fascinating, and
Yeah.
I think it's needed.
Yeah. It's beautiful. And there's a lot of directions we can go because what first attracted you to pursue filmmaking? Because I think you hinted, or you probably told me this, that you really started pursuing photography first and then went into filmmaking? Or
Yeah.
was it painting, or like what, how did you get into the arts? I mean, first of all, like, did you grow up watching TV, movies? Like, your parents, were they taking you to art galleries to see movies or movie theaters? How'd you form that aesthetic? Like you were saying, what your dad's profession was, how'd you form that aesthetic to lean towards the arts?
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, my dad was a cinephile, but he was more into like kind of like, junky, B movie, um, horror, slasher horror type stuff.
And he was
Raunchy.
taking
Oh,
you to movie theaters or seeing it at home on TV?
well, there was yeah, we had a VCR. So this is like early 80s, but he would always take me to the movie theater. Like he just loved going to the theater. And so I would go with him. But he had a taste for kind of the oddball. Like he wasn't, he'd take me to like, the new Hollywood film, but when he was renting movies at home, he would always seek out kind of those like odd sci-fi horror type films. And when I was ready to see that, when I was like around 10, even though maybe I was still too young to see some of that content, um, I was just struck by the weirdness of some of these films. Like, there'd be like plot devices and stories that were just so eccentric and odd and weird. And maybe that just burned something in my brain for the longest time. And I'm revisiting a lot of those films now, because it's just so accessible to retrieve some of those films. And for better or for worse, some of them are really just junky, really bad films. But others, I'm like, okay, I understand where I have this memory.
Yeah.
It's now like projected in front of me. It's no longer a dream. I can see it now. And so for some reason, that scene or that actor, really imprinted something in my brain that I carried over for years. And I didn't know where it came from. I don't know, like maybe it applied somehow in the work that I have done. But now I know. I realize that, okay, this was the film that had this scene and invoked kind of this live spirit in my brain.
But
And then,
there's two things you said there.
mhm.
What kicked you over to tipping point? What's the tipping point to go, I wanna make films? And then, also, just a really quick aside, have you ever seen Trailers from Hell, the
Yeah,
series on
yeah, yeah,
YouTube?
yeah. Joe Dante, I think.
Yeah, because that's
Yeah.
an amazing way to visit those films in
Hmm.
2 minutes, and then but, the other thing was, it's interesting that you were sensing this, but you have s you did you grow up a reader? Because you have a sense of what narrative is and storytelling is, even though you make non well, your bio claims you're non-narrative filmmaker. But
Well,
I'm
no, I
just
think it's like nonfiction, not
Oh,
non-narrative.
nonfiction. Well,
Yeah,
yeah, fiction. Well, that's true. Fiction. Well, how
but every
different fiction? But was there some inclination growing up for you to study fiction, nonfiction? Fiction is narrative and storytelling, isn't it?
I think, well, everything's narrative, right? There's always going to be a beginning and end. So whatever happens in between. there's a narrative
Well,
involved.
you must have ESP because you're anticipating this big question I asked all the experimental filmmakers. But that's down the line. Sorry, I inserted so much in the middle of your question. So go
That's all right.
ahead. It's more. The question was, did you grow up a reader also to develop, storytelling? And then what was the tipping point to become, I can be a filmmaker?
Well, yeah, my mom was a teacher, so I read.
Okay, you grew up a reader.
Yeah, and we're avid readers to our daughter as well. What was the tipping point? Oh, just I think my parents. I can't remember what grade I was in. Maybe grade 7. My parents bought a home movie camera, right? Just
Oh,
that was like that was like kind of like the new way to document the family. My parents would bring it out every once in a while, but then it was sitting collecting dust, and I'm like, okay, well, why don't I just like take it out and like create these like small little stories? So
right.
I did, crude animation, right? I was like turning on and off the button, moving my GI Joes, and and I don't know, maybe because I was watching so much movies, I probably recreate some scenes here and there with
Yeah.
like whatever objects I had. Um, but then I got more serious about storytelling when it was in high school, and I was introduced to these other filmmakers. So that's where my history
I
teacher really
see.
gave me a sense of like, how I could treat this a little bit more seriously.
Right.
And also more simply,
Yeah.
because a lot of those stories are just very simple stories, but they're very evocative because of the acting, and 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 they're very human. Like I could connect to them just like in terms of identifying what's happening to those characters.
Yeah,
Like
like
it's hard to identify it in a big Hollywood film because it's just so
right.
much spectacle.
So
But
much.
when
You mentioned Truffaut. I'll just interject really quick. Like you
yeah.
see 400 blows and it makes an impact on you. It's a story of a kid.
Oh, exactly, And so I wasn't a rebellious kid, but at that time I was listening to a lot of like punk,
Yeah.
around grade 9 I was probably listening to The Clash,
Yeah.
and I watching this film, like the 400 blows I saw for the first time in grade 9,
Yeah.
and I could identify with this kid and what he was going through. And I wasn't really sensing that with a lot of stuff that was coming out of Hollywood at that time.
Right.
It was just a very simple story, and it, the camera just locks on him. Like it's just like it's so contained and claustrophobic that the kid's really wanting to get out. So it's also just like on subconsciously it just locks in the brain, like these framing and compositional techniques that I didn't even know at the time, but somehow that containment is like really putting pressure on this kid, right?
Yeah.
And of course the acting itself, I mean, it's just tremendous,
Exactly.
for non-actor, right, at
So
the time.
you actually we'll suss this out bigger, but you actually anticipate a question. How did you form your framing aesthetic? Because you just said framing.
Mm.
Because I'm curious, look at the aspect ratio we're in right now. But the movie maker often goes like this. They go 1-3-3 with their hands.
Yeah.
Or they used to. They don't go 1-6. Like I can't do it here. But just I mean, I cheated and interrupted you rudely. Sorry, but at some point you started studying photography
Yeah.
before film.
Well,
But then
they were kind of at the same time,
right,
but I was gravitating to more towards photography. I
right,
just I just had a love for the darkroom. Honestly, it wasn't really about recording a time, place, or event. I could do that with the camera, but the opportunity to take an image and then develop it, it was a little bit more difficult to do that with film at the time because you had to send it out. But I had ownership of every single step, and
you mean you were developing 35 millimeter black and white film stills in a dark room?
yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I shoot that once a year. I shoot one roll, and my friend's the best 35 millimeter developer and photographer in LA, black and white, and he only film, no digital.
Oh,
And it's
great.
a miracle. I showed this person in one of the films. She goes, "That's amazing." I goes, it's film. You probably don't even know what film is, but it is amazing medium. But even with photography, I'm just curious, how did you what influenced your framing aesthetic? How would you explain that?
I don't know. It's like really something I relate to my students, that you have to, I can teach you about compositional design, and we can go over like ideas around how to work with like rules of third, kind of the traditional methods of like how to compose a good image. But you will not be able to compose a good image unless you practice. So I think like those years of high school, I was practicing. And, in some ways, when you reflect back on the work, you're like, well, you know what? I could have placed that little G.I. Joe guy maybe a little bit closer to the lens to get like a forced perspective, like to make that, you know, uh, car just a little bit bigger, right? Like you're figuring things out. So I didn't have any books. I wasn't reading any books about this. It's just like you shoot and then you see and then you learn. And so from that you're like, oh no, that's not how they did it in that movie. Okay, I must have misplaced where I put these people. So like you're thinking about blocking, like it's and I wouldn't even know what blocking would have been at that time, but you're
Right.
kind of rearranging things in front of the camera, and then you're like, whatever house light I had, I'm like trying to work
Yeah.
that into like create emotion. But under the mentorship of my instructor at the time at university, once again, it's like looking at these works from masters of photography, and it just gives you an understanding of like how to then think about composition and how to think about framing,
Yeah.
and thinking about your place within that space as well. I mean, that's one of the most important things, is understanding that you are an individual amongst all the other individuals in that space. So what are you choosing to include or exclude? How are you defining the activity in that space? So before I even like think about taking a shot, I'm just like sitting down and just, watching. Right. And I think part of that is, I, I, I it's one of like the biggest things I give my students advice is just don't just pick up the camera and shoot. Just sit and watch.
Yeah.
Just sit and watch.
Yeah. James Benning tells his students two exercises: go to a cop station and sit in the waiting room. Because I'm going to film school. What? And then he goes, go to this hillside and watch the sunrise. But what
Yeah, that's great advice.
your practice thing is really good, because I I I asked Bruce Bailey this question about, I don't know, 3 to 5 years ago at the Ann Arbor Film Festival. And he's a have you ever seen him speak? He's a spunky kind of guy, but he's funny. And he founded Canyon Cinema.
Yeah, yeah.
And I says, how'd you form your framing aesthetic? And he goes, I don't know. They asked Jean Cocteau that question, and he said, from the way the knife and fork and spoon are placed on the dinner table, which is an amazing thought, because I think we've been hijacked by the framing aesthetic, because painters and photographers before us established it. So then you get somebody like Robert Frank, and he comes along and frames something like this, and it's like, wait, that's not right. You can't frame it that way, And so the practice thing was really good. But I have to follow up with the aesthetic question. My friend, you brought up music, which is closely related. He says in music, it's three things, the three T's: technique, theory, and taste. So technique, you can learn how to make the film. Theory, you can study, whoever talked about it. Taste, how does one acquire taste?
Oh, that's like always the most difficult question, I think. I talk about this with my partner all the time. Like she's a filmmaker and musician, and it's it's hard. Like I someone else might say, "Hey Mike, the stuff that you listen to, the stuff that you're into, sucks." Um And, I might also be of that sense too, but, it's hard. I think like I really try my best to have my students be open-minded. Like I think that's
Yeah,
the biggest thing is just be open-minded to the stuff that I'm presenting you, to the
yeah,
music that I'm presenting to you. You may not like it, but I might be presenting you like a noise artist, right? And it might be just grating to the ears, but we have to understand where that artist is coming from, right? But then on the other end, I might bring in a Miley Cyrus song, right? Where the
yeah,
production values are so clean, they're so
yeah,
crisp. It's really easy to listen to, but then you're listening to Miley Cyrus
yeah,
and you're not interested in the song or the story or anything, right? So
yeah,
you kind of think like, okay, it's not always about production value, right? You have to think about what the intent is. um I don't know, I think I have good taste
yeah,
personally, but
yeah,
it's hard, right? Like,
yeah,
I would rather eat like a really good steak as opposed to like a shitty McDonald's cheeseburger, right?
right.
So I don't know,
No,
that
it's
is such a
funny.
hard question to
Well, it's funny
answer.
because Sabine said the word right there you used was taste. So it is amazing that I didn't say aesthetic because I usually follow up the question with what's the difference between aesthetic and taste? And they go, well, someone told me, well, aesthetic is beauty, comes from the word beauty. And that's like, well, a steak tastes better, literally tastes better than the hamburger. But to some, that is an amazing thing. Stravinsky said most people don't know what they like what they know. So if you ask a normal kid in America, what's your favorite meal? And they go, McDonald's, you go, ugh, because they're like, that's what they know.
Yeah.
Maybe if their parents feed them that a lot or whatever. So,
Mhm.
I'm just intrigued by your answer, especially the practice and keeping an open mind. But again, you have ESP because you anticipated the next question. A screenwriting teacher told me a great film is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great film or great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process?
Um, well, for me, I'm just going to speak on my behalf in terms of how I look at my, the approach that I start and well, okay, let me backtrack here. Um, I have an idea and I want to fulfill the most of that idea through the creative making process. However, I think the two quotes that you just read there, I think there's like there should be an average. Um, because when we go back to taste, there are a lot of like horrible movies. Well, what critics are,
Yeah,
maybe the general public will think is like really just really awful films, right? And those films I will equally love,
yeah,
and they are like junk food to me.
yeah,
But the reason why I like that type of work, and I can understand that, the intent of the filmmaker was to tell the story to the best that they could with the limited budget that they had, with the, maybe not the highest caliber actors that they had, but, there was a vision involved. And that vision was carried throughout. It might be messy, there might be hiccups, but, I can sense the energy was there.
yeah,
So for me, what drives me crazy, Jerry, is things that bore me.
yeah,
Okay, like I don't want to be bored by watching something or listening to something.
yeah,
And that's a weird thing to say. I think bored is maybe not the right word, but I could not think of anything worse than being bored by something.
yeah.
You know, um, there are moments where I'm like, watching a very long, like a Bellatar film, for instance, and
Yeah.
I'm not bored by it. I'm actually transfixed by it. I am meditating with it. But if I sense that there's a laziness in the work, perhaps, or it just wasn't carried through with thought and intent, then
Yeah.
that's where perhaps I'm disengaging or I'm just bored by it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if
No,
this answer. I'm like I went on
no,
a tangent
it
there, but
answers
like
it well. I loved you brought up Bella because it's just like Terrence Malick. People go, "Oh, I found that boring." It's like, yeah, well, okay, I can see that you could see that as boring at times, but it's a different approach. Or just Tarkovsky, all those guys, or James Benning. Richard Kerr told me the best story of Ann Arbor. He said, we were watching James Benning's, the first film that made the splash for him in 73 in Ann Arbor, 11 by 17, or, you're just driving across America. And he
yeah.
says, we're all drinking beers in the theater and we're booing it. Boo! And he says, when the film ended, we were all like this. So it's the history of Ann Arbor in his little story that if
Oh
you
no.
give it the time, you surrender to it, you might find it not boring. But that's a fine aesthetic. What you said there, what your not aesthetic, your approach in answering the question. I like that word because it articulated it. But Mike, it also goes to Duchamp, who said, there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your audience when you're making your film?
Not much really.
Yeah.
Um, I know there's an audience out there for my work, so I already know that the type of work that I do um, will gravitate to that kind of niche audience for experimental or documentary. So I know that there's people out there that will like the work that I do or not like the work that I do.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I'm not really seeking any type of gratification from an audience. I like conversation with like
Yeah.
other artists or audience members who see something in the work maybe that I hope that I intended to you know um, you know create or um, uh, you know I don't know. Or on the other end, they see something that I didn't see,
Yeah.
and that's also equally gratifying in terms of having a starter conversation piece. But no, when I do the work that I do, I'm never really ever thinking of an audience. I'm just like really thinking about um geez, I don't know. I'm not really thinking about myself. It's just like it takes me into a zone that I'm working with these materials. I'm out in the about with the landscape, and I'm just trying to figure something out.
Yeah.
It's kind of that make and learn and then do again. And yeah, I don't know. It's like a puzzle piece for me because
Yeah. That was,
I'll start with an idea,
yeah.
and then I'm not really sure if the path that I'm on is the right path. So yeah, you're figuring it out along the way.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of spontaneity involved, and and there's a lot, a lot of times there's a lot of failure. There's, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah. No, I like what you said there too, because it also reminded me of McLuhan. I don't bring this one up very often anymore, but I go, McLuhan said there's no such thing as a good or a bad film. It's a good or a bad viewing experience. And it's like, you brought up, cheesy Hollywood film where you could have a great time, as like Timmy Burton made a film about Ed Wood, who's proclaimed the worst filmmaker ever in Hollywood. And I've shown Ed Wood films and people go, wow, and they have a good time. So what are we here to have a good time, or say that was not a very well made film? But let's say me and you were starting Ann Arbor Film Festival 60 years ago with George Manupelli. Should we be more inclusive or more exclusive? And I'll just set it up. I asked Chick Strand this. She says, well, we were doing it at the same time with Canyon Cinema, her and Bruce Bailey, and they were saying, well, let's show a cartoon, a newsreel, and then an experimental film. And Brackage came along and says, don't show that other stuff, just show experimental film. So would you lean towards us being more inclusive or more exclusive?
Um, those are kind of broad black and white strokes. So it's hard, because I'm never against animation. I'm never
Yeah,
against educational films. I think
yeah,
there's a like value and quality in any of those works. It depends on how you program it. So if you have a good curator and programmer, it could work.
yeah,
You know, I think you should, in terms of inclusiveness, you should think about, topical issues that are current.
yeah,
Um, you should, as a programmer curator, you should think about your audience, of course. Filmmakers don't necessarily always need to think about their audience, but the programmers and curators should think about their audience. And I mean, as you were mentioning, those are great debates, right?
yeah,
One person has their way of like working their program. But this is where, once again, I go back to my students. I'll be teaching an experimental class, but I'm not always necessarily presenting an experimental film all the time,
yeah,
right? Because it doesn't matter what you're doing, whether you're painting or sculptor or making a film. You're always experimenting somehow.
yeah,
Even if you're creating a dramatic film, you're experimenting with how you're going to place the light, right?
yeah,
So that's where this idea of like being open,
yeah,
having an open mind to your practice, to the practice of others. You might disagree with it. It might not emotionally engage you. That's fine. But at least like you're learning in a way where it's giving you ideas. It's experiential. It's like it's fluid, that you can take the good and the bad and make it your own. It's it's never good to censor yourself to other things out there. There's like so many wonderful and bad things equally, and you should have that time to just like go full on into it. And that's like something I did when I was in high school. Like after I, had that exposure to kind of like what we call art cinema. But when I would go into the movie store, I'd always get three movies. I would get like your traditional Hollywood film, art film, and a B movie, right? So like
uh,
I was just taking it all in, right? Because like at that time, I knew that like, okay, so and so had a bigger budget, so and so didn't have a bigger budget. Someone's working with like big spectacle, others are telling a simple story, but they're all kind of the same. Like they're all kind of working within the same type of content, but then their approach, their style, and the use of form is all kind of different. And I think through that, I was learning a lot. Just that self education. Um,
you had a good
yeah.
sensibility there because Peter Greenaway, who crosses over there, he's truly an experimental film. Sabine told me he made this film, which was a spoof on structural cinema, and she said she laughed through the whole thing, and everybody was like, "Why are you laughing?" And and so he said that cinema is much too rich a medium to be left to storytellers. Now we know it's only 130 years old, basically, cinema, and 120 years of it is basically filming plays. I know there's more to it, but and this is a stupid question, but just your thoughts. Are experimental filmmakers telling stories a different way or doing something completely different?
Well, I mean, the word experimental, once again, can be fluid, right?
Yeah.
But, telling stories, well, I mean, you can have traditional stories, you can have personal stories, emotional stories. I think it's like how that filmmaker interprets that experience on the medium. And so, you could have,
Well,
I
I
like
was
this example where like,
yeah,
Black Ice by Brackage, right? Where it's his experience of falling on ice and what happened in terms of that experience, having that kind of flickering effect, that kind of cognitive effect that like took place in that moment, right? Um, and so he tells that through painting and through movement. um I equate that to the same way as like how a guitar player will like work a guitar or a dancer will move in space. You're
Yeah.
not actually telling me anything. You're not using words, but there's this kind of like emotion through the body, through the gesture. And
Yeah.
so that's a story to me. That is a story.
Yeah.
So we don't need to always have the written word. We don't need to always have dialogue. So with
Yeah.
experimental filmmakers, you can scratch, you can color, you can flip that camera upside down, you can use interesting sonic devices, right? There are different ways to communicate these ideas to your audience.
Yeah, it was funny because I usually interject this one line before, and I'm glad I didn't because you sussed it out in a bigger picture for me. I usually say, me and you could watch The Flicker by Tony Conrad. Now, both of us will see black and white frames flickering on and off for 15 minutes. We could have a story go through our heads, but he didn't go, here's a story I'm telling you. Whereas Andrew Norin said, if you put one frame after another, that's storytelling, that's narrative. So, you know, I tend to say, to go back to something else you said, is great. I think great art is, it fucks your shit up and it makes you go, I could do that, you know. So if you see something, you know, like the hidden question here too is like, what's the services and disservices of marginalizing experimental film? And you know what I mean by experimental film, because these film noir guys you bring up, or Hitchcock using Salvador Dali and Spellbound, have experimental techniques or elements, but we know there is this sort of world of experimental film, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty cool, I think, because it's so teeny, you know, like it's not huge and overblown. Like I love Phil Solomon. When I asked him all these questions, he'd go, I'm a professional experimental filmmaker. It's like, yeah, right. You still have to teach. So what? You got your film shown at Sundance. And he really, was a great, like a promoter of experimental film. But this idea, like Jackson Pollock was on the cover of Life magazine in 49, people could start forming an aesthetic on experimental painting. There was no Bruce Conner or Maya Deren's on cover of Life magazine. People never really formed an aesthetic on experimental film. We have, because we've been drenched in it. So we have our likes and dislikes. And what I find is that it's entitled kind of rich art kids who have dominated experimental film and you know they've formed the avant-garde aesthetic. And
Mm.
I was curious of your feelings on that, because it doesn't seem like it's been too marginalized. I mean, it's like, I can't say it's someone's fault, but
Mm.
does that, you have the students, it better than me, because I will go talk at Cal Arts or San Francisco Art Institute, but it seems like they're all rich art kids to me. And I'm not trying to say that like they're bad. They don't have a choice. That's.
Yeah, I think it's probably where you know you come from. Like a lot of the filmmakers that I appreciate, and a lot of the members that I worked with in my collective back in Montreal, Double Negative, they were all working class kids. You know,
Yeah.
um, we none of us were rich,
Yeah.
but we all made like really interesting works, and a few of them, are masterclass filmmakers like Daichi Saito,
Yeah.
Milena Shizlam, Carl Lemieux, Lindsay McIntyre. Like, we didn't, none of us came from like rich backgrounds or families.
All right.
Even in Regina here, a lot of my friends, like cinematographer that I work with, still 20 years later, his dad's a truck driver.
Yeah.
So, um, is it marginalized? Well, it's definitely niche. Um, I think my responsibility as an educator is to the best of my ability, once again, it's developing or having my students develop an open awareness of different arts,
Yeah.
different possibilities, different philosophies. I do the best that I can in whatever capacity that I have. Whether they take that knowledge forward, great. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. And I've had a few amazing students that have done some wonderful work and are in that kind of marginalized community of experimental cinema. But, they go back and forth. They'll
Yeah.
sometimes work for a nonprofit center, and they're community driven, and they're doing their best within their world, right?
Yeah.
And develop these like beautiful little films that they share with their friends, or get played at certain festivals, or just disseminate online. It's like, I made this, check it out. And I'm like, hey,
Yeah.
great. So yeah, I don't know, it's
No, you explained it well.
I guess, yeah, it's just, I think that's a responsibility hopefully any educator has. It's just like making
Yeah.
sure that they're aware of what's happening, and
Yeah.
what possibilities there are, and if they want to include maybe just an idea of it in the dramatic work that they do down the road, great. I'm happy.
Yeah.
At least you learned something in my class.
Mike, what's more important, conviction or compromise?
Oh, I think like both. Again, sorry
Yeah.
to split this, because um, conviction is great because that shows an idea of rigor, of ethic. That you're determined to get something done. You want to have the story told. But once again, that filmmaker or that artist should know that there are challenging roads ahead, and sometimes you have to compromise. Something simple could be that I go out and I want to shoot in this landscape, and I'm like hoping that it's going to be a nice sunny day to get that nice hard light, but then it rains, and so what do, right? You
Yeah.
compromise. Maybe you change your strategy. A film that I did back in 2017, I wrote a grant to do a portrait of this like radio transmitter building, beautiful like Art Deco building, right? That was about to be demolished a few years down the road. And all of a sudden, I get this call that they're going to demolish it a lot sooner than I was anticipating. So everything that I was organizing in terms of the shoot had to be tossed. I ran. Well, I didn't run. I took my car, drove 2 hours north, filmed it with my Bolex, 4 rolls of film, came back, got a beer out of the fridge, and I was just like in tears. Basically, it's like, this is not the film that I wanted to do. And my partner at the time is like, listen, take a step back, think about what you shot, and just think about how you could change the idea. It might still be the same, but your way of working towards that idea will be on a different path. And she's like a smart my wife is just like the smartest person in the world. So I did that, and the whole trajectory of that film went in a different direction. So I was still convicted to like make sure that I wanted to like complete it. About 80% of my idea was there, but I had to do a whole bunch of compromises to get to that. And I
Yeah.
think it actually made me just that bit of a better filmmaker, because I was not in my safe zone. My back was against the wall. It was scary, but it was also probably one of the most rewarding film experiences that I've ever had, because then I didn't always have to go out to that location, film and film and film. I filmed everything that I did, and then I was in my shed and I was destroying the film, because like that, once again, it's like, I'm thinking of a building that's being demolished, and I'm like, well, how can I invoke an idea within the form? And so I started just to destroy the film itself. And so it has this interesting synergy involved in terms of like the form and the content as you watch it. But it was
Dude,
gratifying
I've
because I was
yeah.
just like outside, and a lot of the post work, a lot of like working with the materials, I was like 20 minutes away from my fridge to grab a beer so I could just enjoy it on a hot day as I was working through this film. It was like probably one of the best experiences I've ever had.
I've seen that film. That is a good film. That really inspired me.
Oh, thanks.
I like that. I love the inside story there. That was great. So T.S. Eliot said poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
What language is my inner dialogue in? What language is my inner dialogue in? I think breath.
Oh
Like
my
it's not.
God, that is a great answer. You know what Abigail Child said? I wish I knew. At least you knew. That is good. So George Manupelli, his mantra is ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says there is no self-expression. Cecil Taylor, great jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making more self-expression? I know it's both and it depends, but just your hunch. Is it more self-expression or more you're a vehicle? Not you, but artists in general, or you, whatever context you want to put in, a vehicle or a vessel for whatever technology or culture is dominant.
Yeah, I no. I think for me, it's self-expression.
Yeah.
It's every film I make, I'm putting myself out there. Like there's a lot of uh, either either it's like working with the materials with my hands, and you see the imprint of my fingerprints, or if I'm shooting, there is like a consideration that myself mediating with that camera in terms of how I'm
Yeah.
framing, or including like I have a cliche in terms of always, mostly incorporating my shadow or some sort of imprint of myself in the landscape, acknowledging my time there. Um,
Yeah.
so for me, it's like I'm always trying to figure out a way of how I create this inclusion of myself, my expression within the filmmaking process.
Can art making, filmmaking be egoless?
I would hope so. Um, yeah.
Is perception reality?
To someone, I think, I don't know. Uh,
Have you
perception
ever
reality.
seen have you ever seen the fake experimental film called Uso Justo?
No,
You
I
gotta
haven't.
see.
No.
Oh, dude, it was Bruce
Uzo.
Connor's favorite.
No, I.
USOJUSTO. You can see it on YouTube.
Okay. I
Coleman
wrote it
Miller, who
down.
made yeah, Coleman Miller made it, and it got rejected in Ann Arbor. Then it won a prize in Ann Arbor. They took it out of the rejection pile because it's a spoof on experimental film, and it's really
Mhm.
funny. And I says, "Is perception reality?" And Coleman went, "That's all you got." Tell me one. Can you go a little over 90 minutes because we sort of got screwed? Are you
Yeah,
on a
I'm
time?
fine. Yeah, yeah. No, it's
Okay.
totally fine.
Sorry about that change. Tell me, Mike, one major element of your filmmaking that's changed since you started, and one major element that stayed the same.
One major change. Um, I think the latter work is becoming a little bit more formal in approach. Um, because a lot of the earlier work focused on issues connected to, you know, ideas around philosophical ideas around photography, or communication cultures, or autobiography. Um, but now I'm kind of being a little bit more open to more formal ideas rooted in kind of elemental ideas of light and shadow, and that's kind of hard to say, but yeah, like it's more formal in its approach.
Yeah.
Something that has remained the same, um low economy. Like I don't like having things too big. I think I can always have very good ideas that are simple. But yeah, low economy equals low stress for me.
Yeah, beautiful. Lewis Carroll said, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
Impossible? I think anything is possible. So never exclude the idea of impossible. I'm sure like people in 1940 thought we would never put someone on the moon.
Yeah.
Impossible. Um, well, I guess the one thing that would probably be like close to an impossible realization, and this sounds so corny, Jerry. I know,
That's
maybe
all right.
because of everything that's going on in the world, especially in the last couple of years. But I hate to say this, but like this is really corny, like world peace.
No, that's not it.
But it's just like I'm just like like it's just like so intense and crazy and divided, and oh man, I just like, can we just like all live together on this tiny planet and get along? Like it's just so mind blowing to me. So anyway, I know that's like probably
No,
the
it's not at all, dude. I study Maria Gumbutis. She's an anthropologist who they dissed, and she says, I can prove there were societies with no violence. And it's like people always think, well, we're hardwired for violence. And it's like, no, we're probably more hardwired to figure out how to get along,
yeah.
and how to negotiate and how to be empathetic. And, it's funny because of that glitch in the computer, I left out like 3 or 4 big questions that tackle all that. And I just
Okay.
said, well, let's just keep going with the filmmaking thing. So, I'll ask them to you right now, really quick. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Oh yeah, I was raised Roman Catholic.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Did you check out at a certain age?
Yeah, I think it was probably around grade 7 or 8 where I was like,
Yeah,
I think I was always interested in the stories. Like the stories were, both like brutal and harsh,
yeah.
and to me, like, like, maybe I was developing that cinematic mind. So like,
Well, how
as,
about the stained glass windows? I mean,
oh,
this
there's,
about choir, the
oh no,
choir.
the
Yeah,
music,
yeah,
the architecture of the buildings. Like at
yeah,
some points, I would just like float off and just look
yeah.
at like the beams,
Yeah.
and I'm like, wow, or the tilings. We
The
was it
tile, exactly.
oh like
Well,
oh no, like being in those spaces, it's weird. I have both great good memories and bad memories
yeah,
of it, and I think it was just um for me, like the good memories are, once again thinking about family and what we did afterwards.
yeah,
We always ate together, and
yeah,
but I started to tune out because like I was always been questioning everything,
yeah,
and yeah, and figuring out, well, maybe there's something more than this,
yeah,
right? Um, not taking it so literally.
yeah.
So
Well,
yeah,
do you pray?
no, no,
If God
I meditate. I
Okay.
meditate. Um,
If
that's
if
the yeah.
God exists, what would you want God to say to you after you die?
Uh, to say to me after, oh, good job.
If Do you think evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I don't know if evil people exist. Well, I mean, people are evil. I don't, nature versus nurture. I don't think they're born evil. I would hope
Yeah,
not. Oh my goodness.
yeah,
But depending on, once again, like people that you're with, people
yeah,
that raised you, you know, do they, manipulate your moral, balance, right? So yeah,
yeah.
so I
Well,
think like, yeah, it's kind of a nurturing thing then.
Yeah.
the nature.
Here's the hidden question. And it's funny because you're like, this is corny world peace, but it really was. I was regretting that I didn't ask you these. And this is the last question of that little part is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? I set up with a few modern thinkers' thoughts. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So, the basic question, Mike, is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you react to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, it seems like that's the case with the media and Trump. I think, the greater the exposure, the more power that he has in disseminating his message. So it's always good to, put a lid on it.
Yeah. Hello.
You know, uh, yeah, those are all interesting takes. For me, like, I don't have any enemies. I mean, there's a lot of people I disagree with, but
But say your daughter came home from school and
yeah,
she didn't say an enemy, but say there's
yeah,
something
like a
that's
bully.
like a bully. How
Mm.
what advice would you give her? What would you say to her?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think once again you have to figure out for that maybe that particular example is like, well, is that bully being bullied, right? And so once again, as a parent developing empathy
Yeah.
for your child, and it's like, okay, yeah, you might be being picked on, but is that person also getting picked on as well? And
Yeah.
is there a way that we can help that person?
Yeah.
And that's finding the root at its early stage, right? As adults, it's perhaps a little bit harder, because people can be set in their ways, they can be hard to engage with, and so at that point I try to, it's always good to keep your ear to the ground as to who's causing um, challenges for others in the world or in your community, and how you can hopefully engage in a very proactive way. But if people are being unreasonable, I'd like to just cut the cord.
Yeah. Really well put. So Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're taught normally to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Probably jealousy. I at a specific point, I think like in my early stages as a filmmaker, maybe finding that I wasn't as good as others and being jealous about it. And then, once again, through that mentorship of like other filmmakers, um, finding peace in terms of what you're doing, and not seeing it as a competition, and so I've come to terms with that. And, for me, it's like the work that I do is like, I'd like to put it out there and share. And once again, it's like, if someone from somewhere really enjoys it and wants to talk to me about it, that's great. And if someone else doesn't, that's fine too. Once again, it goes back to taste. Not
Dude,
everyone's going to like everything, right?
yeah.
And so I'm not, there to please. And so having that thought and just, coming to my own as someone who's just really wanting to make work and enjoying what I do, that's all I want to do. That's
But Mike, this really comes to something I don't usually bring up, and I'm always curious about it because, I grew up playing sports too, but I never played in the varsity teams or anything, and I always stayed active. And I threw the football for 30 years, and COVID started. I stopped throwing the football, and my arms are
no.
sore now. And
Oh, no.
like, it's like I like the activity of sports, but
Yeah.
there is this thing in jock. So, you're a swimmer and a hockey player. Now, maybe swimming you do because it's great activity and you're not swimming to win a race. But in hockey, Yeah, you can play to have fun, but there's still competition. The bottom line question really is, do you think humans are hardwired? Is competition? It's not. It's more. That's again the more question. Is
Mm.
competition in humans more invented or more innate? Because that's like you went through that. That was natural for you to do that. You're with your peer groups, and some of them, and especially in experimental film, it's so small. Like who's getting the prizes? You know, it goes to George Manupelli. He hated when this family's uh, son died, and they go, "We want to give you money and have prize money." He went, "Oh no." Because
Mm.
all he was doing was collecting a couple bucks so they could drink beers when they were watching the films. He
Right.
didn't want it to be competition. And now it's like, who gets the money? Who gets the $3,000? It's like, I mean, it's a hard thing. I understand, how competition can be healthy. You you know,
Yeah, no, I I think in some ways, like it might be both, like, when you're kids and you do like a simple thing, it's like I'll race you to the tree, right? So it's a
yeah,
competition who's faster.
yeah,
But then, it's invented in ways where there's like those kind of structured programs where like when I was a swimmer, it's like, competitive swimming, like who can be the best at this um, style of swimming, right? Um,
so you did experience that in swimming. You
yeah.
experienced it both in hockey and
Yeah, I was a competitive swimmer up until grade 10, and then
yeah,
I then joined water polo, and but in a lot of ways, I actually really enjoyed the competitive sports.
yeah,
Um, it can be. It all depends. I guess it really all depends on who your coaches are. I've had really bad coaches where, after a hockey game and you get yelled at and you're like, 11 years old and you just have no idea why you're getting yelled at, right? And then you have another coach, uh, who will explain in a very calm way as to why you lost, but how you can improve.
yeah,
So it's about who's guiding you, you know, especially
yeah,
at like a very young age, like you have to be very careful on how you treat the minds of those young kids.
yeah,
And so, I noticed right away that when hockey, for some reason, I think in particular, there is just that kind of like intensity.
oh yeah,
Just like the coaches could be just really aggressive. The audience could be very aggressive. And so that's kind of when I clocked out. I was like, I don't want this. But swimming
yeah.
was different. It was a little bit more inclusive. It was competitive, but I think that competitive nature also developed a rigor that carried over into my education and in my art practice.
It probably,
Like,
how could you deny that if you're in that in two sports and then all of a sudden you go into filmmaking? And then they exist, you're going to go, "Oh, I won't be competitive in film." It's like, how could you not? I mean, it's just like,
yeah, it's well, I don't see it as like, teams or sports in film. Like, everyone's going to have a different approach. Like there anyway, I think it's actually kind of silly to even like equate the two because it's not a
uh,
sport.
I, yeah,
And, I guess where I was coming from at the beginning is like I had these intentions of where I thought it would be or
yeah,
where it would carry me, and I wasn't seeing that. And then all of a sudden I'm like, this is too much. This, once again, going back to your original question about 40 minutes ago about ego, and maybe, at that time I was just developing this big ego that I had to squash,
yeah.
right? And once I did that, um, luckily enough, at a very early stage in my career as a filmmaker, I learned to be a little bit better human being and better with others, in how I carried my career forward.
Beautiful. Just a few more here, Mike. I appreciate your time. It's truly been enlightening for me. There's a line that goes, "You create what you resist," or "one creates what one resists." Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into, "You are
Yes.
what you are what you hate." And James Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated in the religion in which you say you disbelieve. But actually, Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, thank God I'm an atheist. So how do you respond to this idea? You create what you resist, or one creates what one resists.
Creating with, that's a good one. I don't think I've ever come across something that I'm resisting. Well, you know what? That's wrong. When you mentioned that question about what has changed or what has continued in my practice, I think that's kind of it. So maybe I was resisting to new ideas or new approaches. And just by chance, when something didn't go my way and I was forced to be in that situation to change an approach, then, I fought through that resistance.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I think failing at something or being approached to a different direction is good for the soul. It's good for the mind. It's good for the practice. So it was kind of, smooth waters don't make strong sailors, right? So, I think I needed that time to challenge the tide.
Yeah. Mike, you really get what I'm after. It's amazing because I'm not asked. I really am trying to get people to get below the surface, like deep sea diving, and you listen to the question well, and it's like McLuhan called that, how do you turn a breakdown into a breakthrough, or a rejection into a redirection? So that whole thing where you said jealousy, and then you get the idea, because it's like, it's heavy to just lay your cards on the line like this. How do you find peace of mind?
Oh, great question. Swimming.
Yeah. Wow.
Once again, the swimming is my form of meditation. There's no distraction. It's just me with my head in the water, in movement, floating, dreaming, and thinking.
How cool. My mom was a swimmer, and she had a bum hip, and then her other hip went bad, and that's what kept her alive for
Oh, great.
She swam for 50, 60 years, like every day.
I cannot stress enough the advantages of swimming. It's good for the soul. It is meditative. You're breathing. You're forced to breathe in a way to calm the heart.
Conscious breathing I do yoga and bike riding. It's similar, but I should swim. It's just that sometimes I want to think the ocean's polluted, but who knows? Can you forget to die?
That is an interesting question. Can you forget to die? Well, is the mind working after you die?
They say it for 6 minutes the mind keeps working. I mean, who knows? No one knows. This is the key. No one knows what happens. Even though there are people who say, I can tell you, we don't know what happens. But that's what Tim Leary says. If you learn how to lucid dream, you can direct your path for like 6 minutes, because you're like practicing. But this is a philosophical question that came from like way back from a old folk song about, can you forget to die? And I just thought it would work into a question, because
I think a lot of people forget to live.
Yeah. I do get that answer.
That's great.
Yeah.
That is a great one.
If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Hey, go watch this movie.
Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
Oh shit, I have to go check my toilet paper. Under. It's easier to rip.
Under. Wow. That's unusual. Do you have a reason?
I think it's just easier to rip.
There you go.
Because if you do it the other way, sometimes it just starts to unwind.
Yeah. Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Something good that I never had and I still don't want.
Yep.
Okay. Oh man, this is gonna be weird because I love car films, but a nice like 70s Camaro.
Nice. You never had one, you never wanted, and it's good.
No.
That is.
I like looking at them, but
What's your favorite car film of all time? Or one of them?
One of them. Well, I like Bullet quite a bit.
There you go. Good
Yeah.
film. All right. That's Steve McQueen, right?
Yeah.
My friend used to live next door to him, and Steve would come and steal his motorcycle.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and like drive it around.
Well, I just actually a couple of days ago I saw a car film that was great. Well, it's not a car film, but there's a lot of great car scenes in it. But White Lightning with Burt Reynolds.
Oh yeah,
great.
That's a great one.
Yeah.
Okay, I got a. Oh no, let's do these. We're coming to a close here.
Sure.
You've really been great at this. These are 5 Alan Watts questions, really brief, off the top of your head in like a couple words.
Okay.
Who started it all?
Amoeba.
Are we going to make it?
We'll try.
Where do we put it?
In there.
Who's cleaning it up?
Someone.
Is it serious?
Is there a joke?
That was good. Okay, here we go. We're almost done. Thornton Wilder wrote in 28, art is confession. Art is the secret told, but art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for over 90 minutes. I'm grateful, and I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this, but what's it really all about for you?
What's it about for me? I think for me, it's to find out who I am in this world.
Yeah.
And that could be different things. First and foremost, like a good partner, a good father, and a good educator and mentor to the people that I meet.
Yeah. It's well done. You've really articulated that well. If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Throw up. So the vomit's now to my eyes.
What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
The cultural shift. I think there's a lot of interesting creative types out there. It's kind of like a good thing, bad thing, but having a glance at like what's on at like different channels on YouTube, like young entrepreneurs, creative makers, you name it. I find there's a lot of like interesting little stories that are being told.
Yeah.
And that encourages me, but there's also a lot of junk out there. So yeah. No, there's like, young kids that are making really wonderful stuff,
Oh, yeah.
And every once in a while, I do hope that they find someone that can help guide them a little bit better. But, the energy, the imagination, this is the stuff that I wish I had when I was a kid, right? Just that access to disseminate my work and, get that feedback from like all over the place.
Yeah.
Because, I was just showing my sisters, they didn't have the time for me.
Right. But it's amazing because, the comments, you know, I've studied this a lot because I'm curious on I've talked to art students and I say, if I sent you a clip or an audio clip or a visual clip, like how many seconds for real, you know, would you spend with it? Like,
Mm,
10? And they go, no, 30. And then my friend who's a pro in New York said the industry standard is 10 seconds.
yeah, it's
Now,
short.
I understand. And, you know, I realized because I avoided YouTube for many years. I was the first one to tell all my friends there's this new thing. And then, you know, now you can see, you know, amazing experimental film history. You could see a lot. And I mean, it's amazing. And I sort of have gotten too deep into, you know, monitoring what this algorithm's telling me to see on YouTube. See, oh wow. And my standard is like 2 seconds. Like, you know, so it's like you
Yeah.
wonder, you know, if you know, when we watched films, you know, Hollis Frampton staring at a lemon for 7 minutes, we would watch the whole thing because we were in a movie theater. I mean,
Yeah.
now you hit the little thing and it goes, zoop, you know, oh, all it was a lemon. I didn't have to waste 6 minutes of my life. In fact, my downfall is that I used to show 5 trailers before every feature when I was
Oh, okay.
shooting films in college.
Mm.
Now it's like a standard. They bombard you with trailers. But now every film, like the Beyond the Bolex film, I encourage everybody to see it who's into films and who knows what a Bolex is. But you can watch the 3-minute trailer and it's like, okay, now I don't have to spend 90 minutes of my life, but you want to suss it out. But there's so much that they pack into 2-minute trailers now that you can experience a lot in the 2 minutes. So it's like there's an art form to that, what you're talking about. YouTube has, you know,
Yeah, no, and yeah, going back to trailers, I've been taking deep dives on trailers myself. Like you mentioned,
yeah,
trailers from hell and the
yeah,
original trailers from 70s
yeah,
and 80s. And right now, it's just like it's so there's so much exposition in the trailers. Like
yeah,
the story is just kind of laid out. But a lot
yeah,
of those ones in the back, it was just about atmosphere, you know.
exactly.
And
Yeah,
so, like, it was just the, you know, maybe every once in a while there's a line of dialogue or maybe a narrator kind of carrying you through. But
yeah,
a lot of it, you know, really was about atmosphere and just like triggering that emotion to see it.
yeah,
So, yeah, I miss those. I miss those a
yeah.
lot.
And you'll love this. I forget his name, but he's sort of known experimental filmmaker. I interviewed him maybe 25 years ago. He said the ideal time for an experimental film is 8 minutes. And it is interesting to think, you knowing this history of experimental film so much, like what the time works. Of course,
Mm.
it doesn't matter, but it is amazing, you know. With my Pixel Vision Festival, I always say keep it down to 2 minutes, you know. You know, but people have shown 8 or 10 or, you know, 90-minute films and people love them or hate them, but you know. Okay,
Yeah.
last
No,
question.
yeah,
Oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Yeah,
Well, I think it just depends. Like what, like you had that experience as a curator, a programmer for a
yeah,
festival, and so once again, it's like understanding your audience for that
yeah,
festival. And so, you know, if your audience is gonna like have a small attention span, then yeah, sure, okay, programs, you know, smaller durational works. But um, again, I can be like totally immersed in a longer film, a slow film,
yeah.
and just be in my own world. And every once in a while, if my mind drifts away, that's okay. You know,
That's
I'll return.
okay,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Well, that's like with Pixel Vision, this is our 32nd year of showing films made with the toy video camera. I've never had a curate because it's always, I only get 24 to 36 entries every year and I show everything. And
That's
my
right.
friend who's, you know, great aesthetic film discussion person with me, head writer for Jeopardy for 10 years, he'd go, curate, Jerry, curate. And
I
I'm
think
like,
I think I might have submitted to that festival a long time ago, like in the late '90s, early 2000s.
pixel this?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it had to be shown then because we never rejected anything.
I don't know. Maybe it did.
How many pixels have you made in your life?
Oh, it
many
would have been that one. Like, it was.
You still have it?
Oh God, I don't know. I know I was collaborating, I think, with Brett Cashmere, who's now ED at Canyon.
I know, Brett.
Yeah. So, yeah, I would
You
look
mean
into.
you made a pixel
Well,
with Brett?
yeah, Brett had a Pixel Vision camera, and he was doing some work with his student film at that time, and then
Is
myself
it?
and him, or myself, we did like this is like almost 25 some years ago, but
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we sent it off to that festival.
Well, dude, I mean, if you sent it, it got in, but I don't recall your name, but it would have been under his name.
Well, that could have been.
But I don't remember if his name is in there. We had sort of a list, but we don't have one of those databases where you can look
Yeah.
up every person.
Check like I would check like Brett or even Alex Rogalski. I'm hopefully we put it in.
How do you spell Alex's last name?
Rogalski. Yeah, I'm hoping that we put it in. I mean, that was the intention at the time, but you know, it was in the periphery that we knew that this festival was happening.
But you mean Brett might have a copy, or Alex might have a copy?
Oh, I have no idea.
Yeah,
I have no idea. That'd be great if they did.
Well,
I mean, I still have it. I'd have to go through my boxes, but I'd have. I mean, I would have to get back to you, just kind of rummage through to see if I still have it.
Well, if you ever find, you mean have the audio cassette or have the camera?
No, the audio cassette.
If you ever find the audio cassette, definitely I'll digitize it for you free.
Oh, geez, that's kind of you. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. No,
I have to see amongst the three of us, like who might actually have this old.
Ask them, because I think there was one pixel in Ann Arbor years ago that was about a guy gaining a lot of weight, and that was on Pixel Vision. Was that the theme?
No.
Okay. No. Anyways, what was it about? Do you remember?
Jeez, what were we filming?
Anyways, let me know, because
remember.
I'm seeking out every pixel ever made. I mean, it's really something, you know, that people, you know, Leighton Pierce shot Pixel, and he never met it. You know, James Benning made one of the greatest pixels ever.
Yeah.
And he doesn't even have a copy, but Sadie, his daughter, became the darling of Pixel.
Yeah, famous for it. Yeah, no, I think that's what introduced was James and Sadie's work back in the 90s, and then Brett had a Pixel Vision camera that he was using for a student film back in the day, and so it's somewhere around there.
I'm in touch with Brett. I'm going to ask him. Actually, I invited him to be interviewed last week, and he said no, but he's publishing my essay in his big Craig Baldwin book.
Oh, great. That's awesome.
That's supposed to come out soon.
Yeah.
That's been due out. Okay, Mike, last question is, what gives you the most optimism?
It is really simple and corny again, but it's my daughter. So.
Oh, that's beautiful. And, you know, the answer I get the most is youth. So it is this idea. Yeah. It's not corny, man. That's beautiful.
Well, she inspires me. She brings me so much joy. She's like really funny. You know, I just love her to death. So yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, Mike, thanks again. This has really been enlightening. Hope we can continue the discussion forever. Sure. Keep me posted on all your new work. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jerry. And this was great, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. Did you enter Ann Arbor this year?
No, I missed the deadline, but I have a new film that's at Flex Fest at the end of February.
Cool. Yeah. And you're going to enter in Ann Arbor next year?
It'll be next year. Yeah, I just missed. I wasn't completely done, so it'll be turned around for next year.
Look forward to it. All right.
Cool.
Thanks
really
again.
Appreciate it, Jerry. Thank you.
That was fun.
Take care.